Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. This is the weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. James Bridgers, who is the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Nina Ashford, Chief of Public Health Services, Dr. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, and our special guest today is Matt Misurko, Emergency Management Specialist for the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon, Mr. County Executive. Good to see you.
Good afternoon, Lorna, and thank everybody for being here today. So let's start it off. I want to start by acknowledging the devastating flooding in Texas, and I think now in New Mexico. Our thoughts are with the families and communities affected by the tragedies. And one of our fire and rescue team members has been deployed to assist with communication efforts in Texas. And our urban search and rescue team is on standby to assist if needed and if they're called upon. Events like this are a reminder of how extreme weather is becoming more frequent and more dangerous. And we've seen it here with sudden storms, flash flooding, an occasional rare tornado now, and record heat, reinforcing how critical it is for us to prepare for extreme weather, even here at home. We've made some major investments in early detection and alert systems to help us better respond to storms and flooding. That includes our flood sensor program, which is now operating across 35 locations in flood-prone areas in the county. These are low-cost solar-powered sensors that monitor rising water levels in real time and instantly alert our emergency teams so they can act faster, whether that means warning residents or sometimes closing roads or dispatching first responders. And with heavier rains and flash floods happening more often, this kind of real-time monitoring has become essential here. We're also a partner with Maryland Mesonet, and Maryland Mesonet was just installed in Montgomery County. It's the first Mesonet weather station at the National Capitol Trolley Museum. This is part of a larger statewide system led by the Maryland Department of Emergency Management and the University of Maryland Atmospheric and Oceanics Science Department to build a more accurate, hyperlocal weather monitoring network across the state. The station collects high-resolution data on wind, temperature, barometric pressure, humidity, precipitation, solar radiation, and even soil moisture. All of this helps improve our forecasting, give us better situational awareness, both during, before, and after severe weather events. We're expecting 4 more Mesonet stations to be installed in the county in the months ahead, and I want to thank the state, the University of Maryland, and our emergency management team for making this partnership work. So to explain more about how the flood sensor program works and the Mesonet program will help us, I've invited Matt Misurko from our Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security to join us. So Matt, thanks for being here, and this is your chance.
Thank you so much for the introduction, sir. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about these programs. The bottom line up front is everybody has a weather problem, as you stated, and Montgomery County is not immune to that. Historically, our big challenge has been flooding, urban heat, and the occasional winter storm. Our flood sensor program kind of started in concert with the Maryland Mesonet program, where there was historical data from our computer-aided dispatch software with our 911 center of low water crossings in the county that do flood out from time to time. There was an agreement initially between the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA in our county to get some low-cost sensors spun up. As that agreement naturally ended the other year, the county has taken that contract, and now we're moving forward with maintaining that system. We are, in fact, actually adding 5 more sensors later this month through the beginning of July across upper Montgomery County, specifically in the Damascus, Laytonsville, and Clarksburg area, to target some of those up-county low water crossings. We've had tremendous success with these. We're noticing that we're able to now anticipate where floodwaters are beginning across the county. We're putting several sensors on individual waterways such as Sligo Creek, Rock Creek, the Hollings River, and even up into some of the smaller streams up towards Little Bennett, Creek watershed. And that's very important because now our first responders, our DOT personnel, they're able to understand where heavy rain is beginning to impact our infrastructure across the county. We also combine some of that information with soil moisture and soil temperature data, as you stated, from the Maryland Mesonet. So we're able to make smarter decisions before the rain starts. For example, in January this past year and back in January of 2024, we were able to use Mesonet stations in College Park, in Prince George's County, and Clarksville and Howard County to understand that we had very cold, wet soils leading into a midwinter precipitation event. And we realized that if we had used this data, we'll be able to work with Park Police to close off Beach Drive, Sligo Creek Parkway proactively. And that actually resulted in zero water rescue events for those two storms. It was a great use of technology. It was a great use of interoperability between looking at soil, hydrology, thinking ahead, game planning for what these weather events are going to throw at us. Ultimately, we can't prevent every event. We can't prevent every single flood, but this technology will act as a sentinel and allow our first responders and our public safety folks to be able to try to catch these water events before they happen. The one thing I really want to emphasize as I kind of begin to close this out, for the public, there's really two good things that you can do. The first is to always sign up for Alert Montgomery. The National Weather Service notifications are passed through our system. We also send traffic notifications out for things such as storm damage or flooding on our major roadways. And the second is to really respect barricades or floodwaters. Simply put, turn around, don't drown. If you're on Beach Drive or any location in the county, you see that a road is closed, it's best to consult your navigation app, whether it's Waze or Google Maps, and it may take a couple of minutes to get home. But it's more important that you arrive safely back to your family and your community. We really appreciate the investment by the county in this, and if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them now.
Thank you, Mr. Orko. I believe there's a hand up already. Questions regarding emergency management, Jenny Abamu. And I believe, Jenny, you are with the Baltimore Banner. Is that correct?
No, I'm with WAMU.
Oh, there you are. Okay, pardon. Go ahead, ask your question.
So I just wanted to ask, like, in terms of like people's, like the residents' awareness, are people made aware that they might be in a flood zone or a place that's prone to flooding? Like, I'm particularly interested in, like, for schools or even like the summer camps that happen. Are people aware that they are in places that could have these kind of risk?
That's a good question, actually. So property by property, we don't, to the best of my knowledge, the county does not, send flyers or notices out about individual properties, but we do post signs if you're entering a location such as, this is a flood-prone area, this is an area that does tend to flood. We do tell folks that if you're going to be out recreating, fishing, biking, any kind of outdoor activity, it's best to sign up for these notifications. Make sure that your wireless emergency alerts are turned on your phone as well, because the information from the National Weather Service will give you a heads up that you are in a location that is about to flood or is, in imminent danger, and you need to seek higher ground immediately. It's especially impactful for the wireless emergency alerts as we are in summertime. So if you're traveling to another state, another part of, even the National Capital Region, that those wireless emergency alerts will help you even if you're outside of Montgomery County's borders. That's really a very good piece of information to have.
Thank you, Jenny. I see.
Can I add real quickly one piece of that? So actually, the county does maintain through our Department of Permitting Services a floodplain map. So if someone wanted to go on our county website, you could just search for Montgomery County floodplain map. If you just search on the county website and it comes up our Department of Permitting Services, you can actually enter your address in, and it will tell you if you are in a 100-year floodplain. I would just sort of state that we are seeing flooding that exceeds the 100-year floodplain on rare but certainly measurable occasion. And so if you're very close to a floodplain, you still should be thinking in terms of planning of how you might exit your residence or the area in which you live if you're very proximal to an area that has a floodplain designation.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. I see Dave Laval has his hand up. DC News Now. Good afternoon, Dave. Please unmute. You need to unmute.
There we go. Sorry.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thanks for inviting us onto this. My question is for Dr. Stoddard. You just talked about, the types of flooding that we've seen so far. Your reaction as the former head of the emergency management as to how the sensors are working.
So, I mean, I would just echo what Matt shared, and I think this has been a tremendous investment by the county. We did have a flood fatality a couple years ago at this point that involved the overtopping of a small sort of underground water transit that led to a low point flooding, and a young person did die as a result of that. And so that really sort of really accelerated our efforts to invest in technology and other efforts to try and get more flood sensors put in. And as Matt alluded to, I think that this is really important too, is it's protecting people who might utilize those roadways, but it's also protecting our first responders by not having them not actually have to go out and do some of these dangerous water rescues with their personal flotation devices and the like. And so we've seen tremendous benefits from this. And really, I think with the Mesonet investment, we're going to really start to have a much better understanding of where we're likely to see localized flooding. Because what we've seen in Montgomery County is you really need to get down to a very small microenvironment level to understand, because you can have rainfall levels in parts of the county that are dramatically different from one another, even though the two locations are relatively close to each other, particularly during these events where you can get, inch plus an hour rates in a localized area that can cause localized micro flooding. And I think the Mesonet's going to really help us really understand how that happens as we get more stations stood up across the county.
And very quickly, if I may have a follow up, and gentlemen, whoever wants to answer it, please do. How much does the program cost, and who picked up the tab?
Matt, I'll let you sort of start that if you like.
Sure. So the initial cost when this agreement first started between FEMA and the county, we got the flood sensors for free. That was a significant investment by FEMA and Montgomery County. And then what we've now transitioned into is to a contract with the vendor that was called a CRADA, a Cooperative Research and Design Agreement. It had a set limit of, I believe, 3 years. The county's now maintaining the sensors. We have a process where we perform vegetation management on these, cut the weeds and the bushes down. So once a season, there's a little bit of money there. And then every 3 years, the sensors, one sensor will go back at a time to get refurbished, new batteries, check the firmware, things like that. It's a very small investment. If I recall correctly, it's only a couple $100 a sensor to actually have them sent back and refurbished. Considering the cost of someone losing their vehicle or getting injured or, God forbid, their life from a flood, it's well worth the investment.
Thank you so much.
And Matt, we didn't talk about this at all, but do you want to talk a little bit about the dam monitoring system as well? Because I think that's also important when we talk about the flooding as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. So right now we have 34 sensors. Some of these sensors are at significant high hazard dams in the county. One of them actually is the PowerPoint image that was referenced at the start of this near US 29, the Burnt Mills Dam. This really helps us because most of the dams in the state of Maryland are earthen dams, so we can get ahead of the water level rises and begin whatever protective measure we can to kind of pump that water off and save that structure wherever possible. Like Earl said, like Dr. Stoddard said, you can have tremendous flooding in Sligo Creek watershed, and then you're in Rock Creek or in the Anacostia branch, and it's sunny, birds are chirping, and there's nothing going on. So these sensors are really important to understand how our dams and our other critical infrastructure are enduring these heavy precipitation events.
Yeah, and I think at least several of our high hazard dams do have a pretty could have a significant human impact. I believe even like the Lake Needwood Bernard Frank complex represents hundreds of homes that could be inundated if that dam, for example, were to fail. And so this has really been sort of a really a pressure point for the county as well to continue to invest in technology that monitors those dam levels, so that if something were happening to one of those earthen dams, we'd have plenty of notice with which to evacuate residents. Fortunately, I think back, I think it was 2008 or so was last time that the Needwood Dam showed any signs of of an issue from an event back then. And there was an after action report developed after that event. It sort of helped fuel a lot of the conversations that led to the flood sensors and other things that we've done over the last several years.
Thank you. Members of the media, any additional questions regarding emergency management and or flooding in Montgomery County? Please raise your hands.
I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege, and Matt's going to be a little bit embarrassed that I do this. But, Matt has been the Office of Emergency Manager for a number of years. And I will say the MESNET program in the state of Maryland started because Matt pushed me to push the state. And so he worked with Joey Crestel at the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. The two of them partnered together to really design the entire program. Then Governor Hogan supported the investment, and now Governor Moore has continued that investment. And it's really been a really bottom-up practitioner to the elected officials and those who make the funding decisions to really invest in this program. So, I just want to say personally thank you to Matt for pushing on that program and really driving really what is a really great enhancement for our state.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard, for those compliments. Any more questions, members of the media? No more questions? Well, Mr. and Ms. Oracle, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Dave, I saw you raise your hand. No? Okay.
I was just saying thank you.
Okay. We know that you need to depart, so thank you for joining us this afternoon and for sharing that information.
Thank you for the privilege of your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. I just want to add one thing to this, is that the county is a couple of years ago began contracting with the Hydrological Survey Service. We are mapping the county because we've had innumerable flood incidents, and they've fortunately tended to be localized. An intersection goes someone underwater, people get water running, into their houses. But we know and recognize, because of the increased incidence of heavy storms, that we are and have seen an increase in flooding. And so we're beginning the process of mapping the county, identifying where the flood-prone areas are, but most importantly, understanding the path that the water takes until it gets to the point that it floods, because we know that sometimes you think it's the sewer inlet that's blocked or something like that, and it turns out it's a problem either farther downstream that's blocked, or that it's drawing too much water in upstream and the pipes aren't capable of handling the amount of water that's coming in. So we're doing what we can to start on a path of fully understanding where our vulnerabilities are so we can address them before we have something tragic. So that's an investment we're making right now. So Matt, thanks for joining us. And Earl, thanks for filling in that nice personal detail there. It's good to know that people actually have, I guess, an example of how a person has a real life actual impact on making something happen just because they said, hey, can you do something about this? So I appreciate that. I want to shift now to talk about housing, where we've made some important progress. Last week, a law went into effect that gives Montgomery County residents the authority to sue landlords who mistreat their tenants. I want to thank Councilmember Kristen Mink for leadership on this bill and for standing up for renters in our community. This legislation closes a loophole that left too many residents without support, and I'm glad we now have it in place. Before this law, we had to rely entirely on state agencies or civil actions by tenants themselves, and even in cases where landlords were ignoring basic health and safety rules. Now we have the ability to step in directly as a government to hold back bad actors accountable. We are protecting people from negligence, retaliation, and unsafe conditions. We've heard from far too many residents over the years who have felt powerless when facing unresponsive or abusive landlords. And this bill gives the county a legal tool to intervene when landlords refuse to meet their responsibilities. We have some buildings that are truly in horrific shape, and landlords have flat out refused to make the repairs they need to make in those buildings. And it's frustrating when you go through the court system, and if somebody fixes a problem the day before they appear in court, judges don't find them, don't hold them accountable. And tenants who may have suffered for months with a defective tenancy, with utilities that were with what do you call them, like appliances that don't work, or with holes in the walls, or with sinks that don't drain, or, flood, and then have to put up with this for months, and then there's no consequences for the landlord for the amount of time they've refused to provide what they're supposed to provide. So we're doing everything we can to strengthen our ability to enforce the housing code. Our Department of Housing and Community Affairs faced significant challenges in enforcing compliance. In FY24 alone, DHC attempted to recover over $1.5 million in unpaid fines. It collected a whopping $100,375. That's what we were able to get for all the fines we issued. These landlords often relied on long delays in district court, and some of the worst actors continue pitching their buildings to prospective tenants as safe, healthy, or luxury dwellings, despite having persistent issues. The fix expands the definition of a person to explicitly include a landlord. This removes the exemption that was created for landlords. It clarifies that consumer goods and services now includes rental housing, and it means the landlords in Montgomery County are now fully subject to the same consumer protection laws as other merchants are subject to. They must not engage, in deceptive, unfair, or unconscionable trade practices. Landlords taking rent money monthly are expected to deliver goods and perform expected services. With the enactment of this bill, our Office of Consumer and Protection and the Office of the County Attorney will be able to bring cases directly into the circuit court. This provides the county with a new and more robust tool to induce compliance from the few landlords who continue to fail to cure housing code violations. This is not an experience that people have with most landlords. I want to be clear about that this is not typical of everybody, but it's typical of more than a few. And so we're doing everything we can to change that. Instead of fighting for single citations, the county can now illustrate patterns of deceptive practices. The Office of Consumer Protection can seek damages, restitution, and other forms of relief. And the county will have the power to seek preliminary, temporary, or permanent injunctions against landlords that show a pattern of property neglect and noncompliance with citations. We've needed the law for a long time, and I hope the fact that it now exists will correct bad actors and keep them from making bad decisions so they don't wind up in this situation in the first place. Also, in the world of renting, the council passed legislation 2 years ago that ties allowable rent increases to a formula, 3% plus the rate of inflation, capped at 6%. Last year, we finalized the regulations for this legislation and went into effect at 6% due to the inflation rate being above 3% at the time. For fiscal 2026, the inflation rate was 2.7, so that means that this year the allowed rent increase is going to be 5.7%. We put out notices of this rate drop back in March, and now it's in effect as of July 1. And it's important for all renters and landlords to be aware of this rate change. I've supported rent stabilization for decades. This is not a secret. It goes back to my time on the Tacoma Park City Council. But this bill did not end up where it needed to be. Along with Councilmember Jawanda and me, we initially proposed a 3% cap unless inflation or necessary repairs necessitated a higher rate of increase. And I'll point out 3% was higher than the average rent increase that was taken by landlords for more than 20 years. So it was not a cap that was below what landlords were typically taking. That was the number we believed would give tenants some predictability and protection from sharp increases, while still allowing landlords to cover legitimate costs. And where we ended up was a rate cap that would be, in this case, more than twice the inflation rate. And since wages for lower paid workers rarely rise even at the inflation rate, it just continues increasing the affordability gap, the gap between what one can afford and what the market rents are. So I'm hopeful that in the future the council will revisit the rent cap to something that's a little more closer tied to what landlords actually experience in terms of increased costs. The bill includes some carve-outs and exemptions that make it easier for landlords to raise rents beyond what most tenants can afford. And in effect, it was watered down with some of the, it was watered down in the way that some of the protections that renters called for were not actually provided. The bill actually exempted from rent stabilization any apartment less than 23 years old. So if people are living in an apartment built in the last 23 years, they're not subject to the stabilization law. Rent stabilization is an important tool for local governments utilized and to help stop rent gouging in high-cost areas. This is not unique to Montgomery County. DC has rent stabilization. The city of Tacoma Park has had rent stabilization for over 40 years, and it's been very successful in protecting tenants, and it's had a positive impact on student mobility, which improves learning outcomes. This is particularly important because I used to teach in the schools, one of the schools down in Tacoma Park, and mobility is a big issue for students. When families have to move every year because rents get too high, the kids wind up in a new school, unfamiliar surroundings, different group of people, different teachers, and often the adjustment period is more difficult for them. And having kids in the same school year after year, having parents involved with the same school year after year actually encourages more civic engagement with the school and with the community at large, and it's just healthier for kids to be in an environment that's stable. So anything we can do to help stabilize the environment that children live in, I think is an important thing to do, and it just happens to be something you can do by protecting tenants. Rent stabilization was validated by the Supreme Court after World War II when returning vets from the war were rewarded by facing rent gouging when they returned home from saving the world from fascism. And the landlords at the time were taking advantage of housing shortages to jack up rents as high as possible for these returning veterans, and it was creating a lot of hardship. So numerous jurisdictions around the country actually created rent control programs at the time to temper the impact of these rent increases on the returning veterans. So yes, we're going to enforce the rent stabilization law as passed. We also have to be honest a little bit about where it falls short and continue to push for solutions that reflect the actual needs of our residents, especially our renters. Other news from the state, some things are a little bit concerning. Before I turn it over to the Health and Human Services team, I want to touch on the continued impacts on our state and the county's economy in the wake of the federal cuts. First, Maryland Secretary of Labor Portia Wu is raising serious concerns about the solvency of the state's unemployment insurance fund. There's a real warning sign when it comes at the time when more people may soon need access to that safety net. Yesterday, I think we know the Supreme Court ruled the Trump administration can move forward with its plan to significantly downsize the federal workforce. I think if everybody remembers, it looked like this was all going to happen all at once right after his administration took office. So then a number of judges intervened and said, no, you can't do that. Well, the court has now pulled that protection off, and so he can go ahead and resize people now. He does not have to wait for the new budget. And this is going to hit communities like ours especially hard, where we have tens of thousands of people who either work directly for the federal government or for contractors. We've already seen early impacts of this, both on contractors and both on federal employees, through buyouts, retirements, and people quietly or not so quietly being pushed out. And most of that isn't even reflected right now in our unemployment numbers. Various courts put a brake, as I said, on the mass firing that the DOJ records had begun to implement. But now we're going to have a problem, and I guess the best hope is that some of the sycophants of the president suddenly realize that they're getting rid of so many people that the agencies aren't going to be able to function and carry out the things they need to do, even if not everything that Trump would like to take away. But we're really worried that these cuts could lead to really serious layoffs. And we're not talking about a few hundred people. We're talking about 10,000 people or more that could easily be vulnerable. And it's just in Montgomery County, not just counting the region. Right now, the county's unemployment rate is 3.2%. It's based on the most recent figures from May. That's up from 2.6 a year ago and well above the record 1.3% that we hit in April of 23. And again, those numbers don't fully capture the job losses in the federal workforce. So we should expect things to get worse before they get better. That's why our investments in workforce support are so critical. In the FY26 budget, we provided additional funding for WorkSource Montgomery to expand its in-person job center in Wheaton and provided more hands-on help for people trying to get back into the workforce. We're also continuing to grow Mobilize Montgomery initiatives to offer displaced workers access to training and hiring events and resources that are tailored to what's actually happening in the economy. I'm, to be honest, pessimistic about the ability to absorb tens of thousands of potential unemployed people back into the workforce. We've known for a while, it's been a talking point about there's a gap between the number of people who, or the skills of the people who are seeking jobs and the large number of jobs that are actually available in the regional economy. There's been a number north of 100,000 that frequently have been cited. But a lot of these are high-tech jobs. They're not the kind of jobs that people working in the federal government and administrative office would likely have experience in. So my concern is there's a mismatch between the jobs that are available and a lot of the skills that people in the federal workforce actually have, and that may exacerbate the problem of absorbing them despite our best efforts to retrain and provide opportunities. All of us are going to be limited in what we can do. We're going to continue to grow our Mobilize Montgomery initiative and do everything we can to help people get access to training and hiring events and resources that are tailored to what's happening. And stay tuned. I'm sure this news will, as it gets worse, you'll hear more from us as we try to update you on what we're doing and what we're actually seeing out there. There's no way I'm going to use the word beautiful to refer to President Trump's spending bill that was passed by Congress last week. The bill will have devastating effects on our residents. As someone who's worked on many budgets, I believe I can say I've rarely seen a proposed budget that's so short-sighted and damaging. I think he's outdone anybody I've ever seen. He's even outdone himself in his last term. It's a moral and physical disaster. And what's maddening is it's amongst all the historic cuts to this bill or cuts to critical services, this bill still manages to balloon the national deficit to record highs. So this bill was not about cutting services and efficiency. It was about shifting all that money into tax cuts for the wealthy. And they're going to manage to increase the deficit in this country by about $3.3 trillion between now and about 2030. And that's an astounding increase in the deficit. And not because anybody saved money by getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, but because they just decided to cut human services and reward rich people with even more money. And I don't understand how the hell you cut services and achieve a record deficit, but they managed to figure out how to do it. This bill proposes more than $1 trillion in cuts nationwide to Medicaid. Here in Montgomery County, tens of thousands of residents are on Medicaid. There are low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities who would lose access to basic health care. This coverage pays for doctor visits, mental health care, and long-term services that allow them to live with dignity. And if this bill goes fully into effect, and if there aren't some changes to some of these things, many of those people who are in need of care are not going to be able to get care. And here's the rub, that the most serious cuts in Medicaid won't take effect until 2027. Why, you might ask, 2027? Because 2027 is after the midterms. So the Republicans wanted to make sure that the people they're going to hammer don't get hammered until after the midterms. At least they don't get hammered completely until after the midterms. So they're deliberately delaying the starting date of some of these program cuts so that residents, not just in Montgomery County, but throughout the country, so that people don't experience the cuts until they've had another election and the Republicans can't be held accountable for things that people don't experience. It's clever. Hopefully the American people have enough sense to see through the ruse. Republicans know this bill is bad news for millions of Americans, which is why they're delaying the most consequential impacts. And if that isn't a warning sign of what's to come, I don't know what is. Furthermore, SNAP, the nation's most important anti-hunger program, would be slashed in this bill and would directly increase food insecurity. It would shift the county or the state's share of SNAP from 50% to 75%, which for both the county and the state is going to be a large increase in what we would have to pay to keep SNAP funded at current levels. Children will go to school hungry. Older adults will be forced to choose between meals and medicine, something that too many people already struggle with. Our nonprofits and schools and food banks are going to be overwhelmed if this is where we go. And one of the things, we've maintained food services post-pandemic. A lot of people thought those needs were going to go away when the pandemic was over, and that has just not happened. All of our food providers report continuing giving out food at the same level or greater than they were during the pandemic. So this is just going to exacerbate this already bad situation. They're going to continue to make further cuts to the National Institutes of Health and other research programs that are going to jeopardize thousands of jobs. And they're also going to destabilize the life sciences and biotech sectors that we've been spent years building here in Montgomery County. But it's not just Montgomery County. These centers are all over the country. There are universities in every state that benefited from partnerships with people like NIH that are seeing their funding cut. It's a core part of our local economy, and it's a source of high-quality jobs for residents, and it's an invaluable pipeline for research. But more than what we're crippling here locally, it's really trying to understand that in a broader sense the impacts of the impact on the environment and industrial impacts on health. A lot of the work that NIH did was looking at causes of diseases, and they often wound up looking at impacts from the environment and impacts from industrial processes. You all read about PFAS now, another chemical that wasn't properly regulated, or the impact of microplastics on health. We're not going to be able to make progress understanding what we need to do about this if research is cut off. You certainly can't rely on the companies that are producing these things to actually do serious research and how to prevent them from causing negative health impacts. And probably, the other thing is it's going to thwart the expansion of companies that produce cures. A lot of the research becomes fundamental to medicines that have been developed and treatments that are developed, not just for Americans, but, throughout the world. And we have drug companies that take advantage of that, and they produce drugs. They make a lot of money. We know that's, absolutely true. It provides a lot of jobs, and it helps grow the economy. So we're actually going to impact, one aspect of our economy that's really positive, and we have the potential to actually thwart its ability to grow. Same thing goes for rolling back support for clean energy and electric vehicles and climate innovation that harms our planet, and it undercuts our efforts to fulfill our climate action plan, which is our goal is to reduce carbon emissions by 100% by 2035. So that's, the local impact. But, the big thing is that, not just for Montgomery County and Maryland, but what we ought to be doing is investing in science. We ought to be investing in the kind of technologies that open the door to new products. And that's not going to happen with that. It's going to hurt actually U.S. manufacturing. So at a time when the president talks about wanting to make America number one, you're pulling out of clean energy, which is one of the fastest growing fields economically, and you're going to pull your resources out of investing in clean energy and leave that to the rest of the world to supply. America will be the only place running on fossil fuels. There's not much of future in fossil fuel technology if that's the case, and there's certainly not going to be a lot of future for American manufacturing if we walk away from playing a role in building windmills or building solar or building hydrogen facilities. So it's not good for the economy. It's not good for U.S. manufacturing, and we're going to be sidelined while the rest of the world looks to consume and produce these technologies. So I'm a little surprised that Republicans are so short-sighted, being these people claim to be the pro-business community, that they don't even understand what they're going to do to businesses that America could be taking the lead in, and instead let us walk away from it by a decision by the federal government not to invest. Big mistake, and we're all going to wind up paying for it. I want to thank and just express my a deep feeling for our folks in the congressional delegation. It has got to be a very difficult place to work in down on Capitol Hill. Senators Chris Van Hollen, Angela Osowicz, as well as our representatives Jamie Raskin, April McLean Delaney, and Glenn Ivey have all stood by us, have all tried to do the right thing, and have basically been thwarted by the Republican Party. So I just want to thank them for the work and their dedication. And hopefully brighter days will come and you'll be able to sit in those offices and actually do productive things and move this country forward instead of having to fight constantly to protect us from being dragged into a rat hole. I know that all of them would feel better about doing things that made things better than having to fight the battles they're engaged in now. With all that said, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Stoddard and the HHS team for anything they would like to add.
So, Dr. Stoddard, I'll start from HHS. Thank you, Mr. County Executive, for updates. The Department of Health and Human Services will continue to work very closely with our state agencies and our state leadership regarding all those cuts that may impact our health and human service community. But I want to remind our reporters that you work very hard to keep our community, our residents informed. There is help that remains in reach via our crises helpline. Again, I remind all that number is 240-777-4000. It is a resource that we use during COVID and many times when folks are experiencing any mental or physical stress. Please use the number. These are very turbulent times, Mr. County Executive, as you have indicated with your update. So having said that, the number is available, 240-777-4000 for those who may need some mental support. I'll stop there and turn it over to Dr. Ashford before she turns it over to Dr. Stoddard for his update. Dr. Ashford.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers. Just a brief update for me on the respiratory disease front. Flu and RSV continue to be at seasonal lows, but we are starting to see a slight uptick in our COVID numbers, which is consistent with our summer wave. So that is just a friendly reminder that if you have found yourself on the side of a summer cold, please do consider testing. But more importantly, if you are sick, if you are symptomatic, please stay home. Wash your hands, cover your face, keep your neighbors safe. And that is all for me. Dr. Stoddard, turning it over to you.
Yeah, I know we already talked about the flooding. I just wanted to add one of the big things that my observations from what we've seen in Texas is that there's a combination of things that have to happen, which is number one, timely alerting, which obviously we've talked about needing, our flood sensors and other programs letting us do. But the other thing is that the person receiving the alert has to have an actionable plan for that to get themselves to safety in a timely manner. And so this is an encouragement I would have for all of our residents to think about where they live and what the hazards that may be presented to them, whether they are flooding or storms. Think about where the safe points are in your house. Think about where the safe point is for you to evacuate. And just, when you receive the alert, what actions are you and your family prepared to take to effectuate your own safe well-being? And so that's one of the big lessons that we've learned from what we're observing in Texas is those individuals had very little time to react, and some of them didn't have a plan that they could effectuate, and so alerting, while important, would not have been sufficient to save as many lives as it could have if people had better, well-developed plans. And so that's certainly something we always encourage our residents to do. So I'll stop there, and I think we could take questions.
Thank you very much, everyone. Members of the media, any questions for the county executive and other officials at this time? Jeannie Bixby, Bethesda Today. Good afternoon, Jeannie.
Good afternoon, Lorna. Good afternoon, Mark. I have a couple of questions I'm asking on behalf of our intern reporter who is off covering another event, but asked me to ask some questions regarding the new fare-free bus policy. Mark, and if you could just kind of talk about how that process went about. I know that Councilmember Glass really spearheaded it, but could you chat a little bit about that process in the budget and also how you're trying to ensure that county residents are aware of this change and are using the buses maybe if they hadn't before?
We're certainly putting out more information publicly to let people know that you can now ride for free. How it came about was actually a lot more complicated than I wish it were. We were faced with having to replace all the fare boxes on the buses. And that was a $19 million expenditure that we would have had to undertake in the next year. And we were also faced simultaneously with declining fare revenues. We are collecting a fraction of the fares on the buses. Without enforcement, most people are riding the bus without paying a fare. And that would mean we would not have the revenues to pay back the $19 million. If we were going to enforce the fares, it was laid out to us that we would have to basically put police on the buses because drivers are not able to enforce the fares and are not going to tell people to get off the bus. And so we were faced with what I think is a real conundrum, which is you could maintain a fare system and spend even more money trying to enforce the fares than the fares you would collect. And that didn't make sense, particularly when coupled with spending $19 million in a tough budget on a fare box. So we decided that for reasons of economy and practicality and for some kind of, without not wanting to exacerbate social problems, because the people most likely not to be paying fares are going to be lower income people of color in this county, frankly, and that the people who actions would be enforced against would be them, and that would lead to more difficulties. We're not looking for opportunities to get people in trouble with the law. So we made a decision to go to zero fares. I would have been happy keeping it at $1. I don't think that was a bad thing. But I didn't think it was responsible to make it more expensive to collect the fares than the fares themselves would yield.
Yeah, thanks. To follow up, I was going to ask, but I think maybe you kind of answered my question, but I wanted to give you the chance to follow up. So do you have concerns about funding the buses in the future, or the fact that it was expensive to collect the fares? Do you think that evens out?
My concern about the future is if there's a requirement that in order for this county to get funding for buses that we're going to need to collect fares, I think we're going to have to revisit this, because now you're talking about walking away from millions and millions of dollars that might be available. And I would not want to have to walk away from that. The county would have no capacity under current circumstances of buying buses if without the kind of support we've been able to have from the federal government. It really makes a difference in what we're able to do. So I hope we don't come to that, but I can't guarantee that we won't.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Members of the media, any other questions this afternoon? No more questions? Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay safe. Have a great afternoon. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.